Yeah, I've enjoyed it. I felt on it all weekend. I felt good in the car, and you saw Q1 run one. I was feeling really strong, and I thought that I thought maybe silly of me, but thought that we were fighting for top positions, and then just the way the plan goes, and where we end up waiting in the pit lane, and losing tire temperature, and losing one, kind of using a tire on the outlap but then coming in, then temperature effect, all these different things just add up to not optimizing the sessions. So we'll have to do some work to try and figure out how to optimize the sessions better.
Is that something new in the last couple of races, or have you felt that at other circuits, or is it circuit specific?
I hope it's circuit specific, but for now I don't quite have the explanation, because it's not like we changed massively the car in the last two races, but for some reason the feeling is not good in the last two races. So we'll look back and try to understand where did it start going wrong.
Thank you. Thanks, Charles.
Can a seemingly simple phrase reveal a complete transformation in the relationship between a pilot and his car? Lewis Hamilton released a few words in the 2025 Singapore GP that left the entire paddock in silence. And today we are going to garden why this message can be the turning point of the whole season for Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton's sixth position in the classification of the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix cannot be understood simply reading the timetable. In such a tight championship, the cold number of a classification does not always reveal the complete story. And in this case, behind that sixth place there is a map of technical decisions, calculated risks, and an adaptation process that defines the current state of the relationship between Hamilton and the SF25. Ferrari arrived in Marina Bay with the obligation to experiment. The SF25 had not finished offering a competitive balance in the first quotes of the calendar, and the urban circuit of Singapore is one of the most demanding of the year. A layout that combines slow and medium curves with violent braking areas and constant direction changes, where traction and rear stability are much more important than peak speed. In this scenario, the team decided to differentiate the configurations of its two pilots. Charles Leclerc opted for a more neutral and balanced package, looking for a faster car in the lines but less stable in curve. Hamilton, on the other hand, was more aggressive in his approach. He opted for greater rear aerodynamic load, sacrificing tip speed for consistency and control in the most critical phases of the circuit. This decision cost him between 5 and 6 km per hour of maximum speed with respect to Leclerc in the long lines of Marina Bay, a difference that in classification can represent up to 0.2 of a second per round. However, it was not a mistake. It was a thoughtful step, part of the learning and tuning process that Hamilton carries out with the SF25. In telemetry it was clearly seen. While Leclerc suffered micro-corrections at the entrance of the slower curves, Hamilton managed to keep traced cleaner and more consistent, although at the expense of losing in the initial accelerations when leaving those curves. The biggest challenge was not speed, but the management of the overheating of the tires. The SF25 has been dragging chronic problems to maintain the optimal temperature in soft compounds, especially in night conditions such as Singapore. In Q3, the data showed that Hamilton completed their quick lap with an increase of more than 3 degrees Celsius at the rear axle temperature with respect to the preparation return, which caused loss of progressive adhesion in the final curves. This detail explains why his return was solid in the first two sectors, but lost performance in the third, where the rear rubber has the most demand. Another key point was the instability of the rear axle, a particularly harmful problem for Hamilton's pilot style. Accustomed to cars with a more planted rear, the British needs to feel a clear support point to release the late brake and rotate the car accurately before accelerating. The SF25, on the other hand, was nervous in rapid transitions between braking and acceleration, forcing a less aggressive and more progressive style. This not only reduces the time by return, but erodes the pilot's confidence. However, in Singapore something different was noticed. Although the problem was still there, Hamilton began to anticipate it, correcting before it appeared. It was the sign that the car began to be instinctively read, not reactive. In strategic terms, Ferrari also played with the departure times. Hamilton was the only one of the two pilots to get out with a cleaner track window in Q2 and Q3, sacrificing rebufo but winning in consistency and data for the team. This choice allowed telemetry to refine even more, although it limited the possibility of scratching those extra tenths that, in ideal conditions, can make the difference between the third row and the first. That is why this sixth place is not a flat result. It is the reflection of a process underway. Of a pilot who, aware that the car is not yet to his liking, is willing to sacrifice pure speed to gain control, trust, and learning. In Formula One, when a pilot of Hamilton's stature begins to prioritize technical understanding over the immediate result, it is because he is building something greater in the long term. Singapore was, in this sense, a transition photograph. A Hamilton that still does not squeeze the entire potential of the SF25, but that no longer fights him, but begins to mold him to respond to his style. And that is the previous step indispensable before making the leap towards absolute performance. There are times when a pilot not only competes against his rivals, against the stopwatch, or against the limits of a difficult car. There are times when he is also struggling to stay whole, for channeling personal pain within an environment that does not forgive any distraction. And that was exactly what Lewis Hamilton lived in the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix. Behind that sixth position and that already iconic phrase, "This car is starting to talk to me," there is a different Lewis. A man who reached one of the most demanding quotes in the calendar after having lost one of the beings he loved most. His Roscoe dog. For those who have followed Hamilton for years, they know that Roscoe was not a simple pet. It was his constant partner for more than a decade. And in the midst of that silent duel, Hamilton did not break. He did something that only the greats know how to do: take the pain and turn it into focus. He channeled that loss not as a weight that subtracted him, but as one more reason to perform. He found on the track a place to process his penalty through the action. And that internal process, that struggle between personal sadness and competitive discipline, is part of why that connection with the car had such a powerful meaning. Because when Hamilton said the car was starting to speak, he was not only talking about telemetry or the feeling of adhesion. I was also talking about himself. From a pilot who, being forced to face emotionally one of its hardest weeks, was also reflected in that car. An unpredictable, complicated, imperfect car, but that finally began to understand, to listen, to answer. And this is not just symbolic. Elite Formula One pilots operate in a particular mental state that combines maximum concentration, emotional hyper-alert, and a kind of intuition trained for years. When something breaks that balance as a personal duel, the pilot has two paths: lose emotional control and fall into mistakes, or, as in this case, to rename that energy in building a new narrative. A new connection. A new beginning. Singapore was the scene of that reconstruction. Of that transition. It was the first race in which Hamilton did not try to show that he already understood the car. It was the first in which he heard what the car told him and decided to flow with him instead of imposing his style. An attitude that speaks not only of technical humility, but of emotional maturity. Because adapting does not mean resigning. It means having emotional intelligence to recognize that evolution begins when you stop fighting and start understanding. What happened in the 2025 Grand Prix was much more than a simple classification. It was a silent but forceful statement that something is changing within Ferrari. Not on timesheets, not in the headlines, but in the bowels of the team. In the pilot-coach relationship, in internal trust. In the narrative of a team that has lived between extremes for more than a decade. From the strategic chaos to technical brilliance, of the talent wasted to the flashes of glory. And now, with Hamilton inside, that pendulum seems to start leaning towards consistency. To understand the magnitude of what this evolution can mean, you have to understand the starting point. Ferrari started the 2025 season as an unknown. With a car, the SF25, which inherits the structural defects of the previous year, especially in terms of traction and rear stability, but also shows signs of having a promising base if it is exploited correctly. Until now, the team had failed to find a clear address. The differences between Leclerc and Hamilton in driving style, technical needs, and communication with engineers only deepened uncertainty. But Singapore lit a light. The most important thing that revealed this weekend was not the result itself, but the consolidation of a pattern. Hamilton is beginning to influence the development of the car. The choice of a configuration with greater rear load, its insistence on stability as a priority, its active adaptation to the SF25 instead of forcing the car to adapt to it. All this points to an evolution that goes beyond immediate performance. Hamilton is not looking for isolated victories. He is building a platform to fight for the title in the second half of the season. And this completely changes Ferrari's role in the fight for the championship. Until a few weeks ago, the Italian team was perceived as a secondary actor. Solid, yes. Capable of podiums, even a circumstantial victory. But far from the regularity of McLaren or the explosiveness of Red Bull. Now, with a Hamilton that begins to understand the red machine from within, the story can change. Because when a pilot of his caliber enters synchrony with his car, he drags the entire team with him. Modify the processes. Align objectives. demand faster answers, shorten development cycles. It raises the internal pressure level and, with it, the level of excellence. The sixth place in classification may seem inconsequential for those who remain on the surface. But if the performance is observed by sectors, the strategic decisions on the track, and the evolution of sensations expressed by Hamilton, something much more valuable is discovered than a pole position, the birth of a winning dynamic. Not from comfort but from work, from the effort, from the ability to learn in adverse conditions. Is this the beginning of Hamilton's resurgence in Ferrari? Are we seeing the birth of a new legendary chapter or just a brief moment of harmony in a season that is still unpredictable?